Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. This is your host, Howard Fox. The Outdoor Adventure Series celebrates individuals and families, businesses and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, and access and enjoyment of the great outdoors. Our guest today is David McIlvaney. David is a New York-based outdoor enthusiast. He helps outdoor brands communicate with their customers. He is an essayist on fly fishing, upland and deer hunting, and general outdoor skills. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting David this year at the Outdoor Writers Association of America's annual conference. And I also know that he is the vice president of the New York City chapter of Trout Unlimited. David, welcome to the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast.
Thank you, Howard. It's a real pleasure to be here and to see you again.
Fantastic. And I feel like it's only been 2 weeks and I've missed you. I mean, the conversations, breaking bread with you and just kind of sharing stories. I think the minute I got on the plane, I missed that. Is all of it.
Absolutely. And if you recall, we were the last people that saw each other of everybody, of the 200 or so people. You and I were there to the bitter end.
Oh, yes, we were. And the final trip to the airport. Oh, my.
Parting at the airport. It was a little Casablanca-ish, you know.
Well, that'll just be for us. Okay.
Okay.
Well, listen, I had the pleasure of meeting you. So for our listeners, before we kind of deep dive into some of the work you're doing, could you share a little bit about your background and kind of how you arrived at the space where you're at today?
Sure. I live in New York City, as you mentioned. I've lived in New York City for the past 25 years or so. Originally from Canada. Left Canada about 35 years. I've lived in Southeast Asia for a bit. Traveled around. I was in film and TV. I directed TV commercials, then became an executive producer of television shows. And I was always a writer. I was always trying to supplement my TV shows with doing some of the writing, as I guess any producer or executive producer does. The outdoor stuff. I grew up as a kid in a small steel town in Canada where on a Saturday morning, your mother said, get out of the house, try not to kill yourself and come back when it's dark, you know?
I love
And
that.
we were very lucky. Yeah, we were very lucky. There was a little forest nearby. So like every other little kid, you go into the forest with your buddies and you poke shit with a stick and just figure life out, right? And then when I got into film and TV and traveled around the world, really lost all that. And it wasn't until my wife and I purchased a cabin up here in the Catskill Mountains, where I currently am, that I felt a real desire to have a different kind of conversation with the woods as I knew it and as I recall them growing up. So I kind of got my outdoorsman thing on, you know. I would leave the city and come up and change into plaid and get out my chainsaws, get out my axe, get out my fly fishing rods, you know, get out my guns. The guns were a relatively new thing to me at that time, and just really enjoy the woods to the fullest extent possible. So that's where I am now. In terms of the writing for outdoors, that really, it's only been a few years, and that really came because of COVID. We decamped from New York City up to the Catskills cabin and, you know, what the hell's going on? And we're all going to die. And a month later, when I realized, okay, maybe we're okay, I sat down and work had sort of dried up a little bit at that time. And I sat down and thought, well, I'm going to write my first 4 big fly fishing adventures. And it happened to be Iceland, Patagonia, Nova Scotia, and Mexico. And I got in touch with an editor and I sold them. And I sold all 4 to a variety of publications. I thought, oh, well, that was kind of cool. Since then, I now have a few editors that, you know, publish my work, both in print and online. And so I'm kind of starting to make a bit of a shift and a bit of a career with that. That was a long answer, Howard. I'm sorry.
No, you know, something I think it actually raises some questions that I have is first, I mean, kind of circling back and unpacking a little bit. I love the fact that you grew up in an era when your mom kicked you out of the house in the morning and said, don't come back until dinner and don't kill anybody, you know,
Don't
or
kill
anybody.
or
And
yourself. Yeah.
yeah. And with you, with your friends, were able to find things to do and enjoy yourself and have adventures because kids today, if you send them outside, they don't know what to do. They don't have their iPad, their smartphone, and their video game. And I wonder if what you experienced, what I experienced, if that's been completely lost or will it ever come back to the way it was?
It's hard to say. I mean, you have to not only do you have to factor in phones and iPads, things like that, I think you also have to factor in this idea of both the helicopter parent and the bulldozer parent. So now kids are going out and somebody's hovering over them to make sure they can't hurt themselves, or somebody's clearing all the obstacles for them to make their way much easier. And I'm fascinated. I think it primarily started in Germany, but let's say Europe. There are these programs where they take little kids, I'm talking like pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, and put them out in the woods and have them and give them, the tools to make their own food or start a little fire or whatever that is. And they're very, very casually supervised. There's no adult anywhere near them. They're kind of watching from afar. And these kids are able to learn and accomplish it. It's a pretty remarkable thing. And I think we've lost that maybe a little bit.
Yeah. When you were growing up, had you, and living up in Canada, if I recall, it was Nova Scotia. That's where you grew up?
No, sorry. My wife's family is in Nova Scotia. I grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, which is just at the very tip of Lake Ontario.
Okay. I know of Hamilton. As you were growing up, the outdoors, what did that mean for you when you visited the outdoors? Had you taken up the hunting, the fishing, the hiking, the biking, boating? What was it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, it was just go hang out outside, or we would get our bikes and ride, I don't know, 10, 12 miles or something to this little inlet of Lake Ontario called Coots Paradise. And we would go fishing. And back then we were coarse fishing, right? For me, fly fishing, I grew up working class. I grew up in a steel town. Fly fishing was something done by old, rich white guys in Connecticut. And I don't even think I really knew where Connecticut was, So we'd go coarse fishing. We'd fish for carp and suckers. And if you caught a bass, that was amazing, that kind of stuff, That was about the extent of it. And then a little bit of camping. And it was all fairly rudimentary. When I got a little older, I got out of school and started working. I met a friend and he was a rock climber. So we started rock climbing. So I had about 3 or 4 years in there where we had some rock climbing adventures. But then life kind of got in the way, and not got in the way, but I just took a different direction. And I got into film and TV and all that kind of stuff. And there just really wasn't the time or the opportunity to have that, that experience with the outdoors again. I will mention very quickly, really, really, one of the things that I'm most grateful for, when I grew up, when I was 10, 11 years old, I picked up a book called My Side of the Mountain, written by Gene Craighead George. And that is about a 14-year-old kid named Sam who lives in New York City and tells his parents one day that he's going to go to the Catskill Mountains and live off the land. Being 1960, they say, okay, good luck, and try not to kill yourself. He goes off and he goes up the side of a mountain, and it is a year in his adventure. He finds a huge tree, he hollows it out, he lives in that. He captures a peregrine falcon, teaches it to hunt for him. He learns how to make his own food, kind of thing. And it's sort of written as a diary. It's just, for a little kid, it was the most fascinating book imaginable, right? Really, really inspired me and made me want to do that even more. And then, as my life took this different turn, 30 years, a while, 40 years later, we end up buying this cabin. And I pick up the book, and I haven't read it in that many years. I pick it up, Howard, only to discover that it's set 6 miles from where this cabin is right now.
Oh, wow.
I had no idea, but every once in a while, the universe kind of throws something your way, right?
Yes, it does. Yes, I love it. I love it. So purchase the cabin. I would imagine, I'm going to take a guess here. In fact, I see, for our listeners, right up behind David, hanging from the wall, is this very substantive looking saw, which I recognized. I imagine the cabin was a little bit of a fixer-upper.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was well built. It is a very rustic cabin, though. It is half off the grid. We have power. There's a spring that we capture to get our water, but there's no septic system at all. So we use composting toilet and sort of a rough gray water system. So we're a little off the grid, and we're a mile up a private dead-end road that is a very rough road. So winters are a little challenging. We tend to decamp in the winter, and last year we headed to Mexico for 2 months. So because I wanted to go fishing and it's warmer. So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, and so circle back for a couple years, COVID rears its ugly head. And, I came from Chicago. I wasn't in a high rise, but I could imagine if you lived in a high rise, it was miserable because you're amongst 50, 100, 200 other
Sure.
people going up and down elevators. But you were fortunate. You had this cabin, you and your wife could head up there and get away from it, be safe.
Mhm.
And this creative bug kind of hits you of beginning to write. And
Right.
how did that begin to take shape for you? Like, there's another path that I'm ready to be taking.
Right. In terms of the process, you mean?
Into
Just
the
or
pro
what was the impetus or
Yeah, I mean, how did you start to, like, something? I want to do some writing. I
right,
want to write about the outdoors. How did that take
right.
place?
Well, I've always been a writer, as I mentioned, and for the
Yeah.
past number of years, I've done a lot of brand writing. I help brands communicate. So that was sort of natural. In terms of the essays, I don't know if you saw Steve Duda from Patagonia talk
Yeah.
when we were at the conference, but he mentioned sort of he's always writing in his head. And I appreciate that because I do the same thing. So even though it maybe had been a few years, before I'd written anything sort of long format like this, the Iceland trip in particular and the Patagonia trip were always running through my head, running through my head. And
Okay.
that's how I write now. So it was a matter of it was in my head for so long and so developed that it was relatively easy just to kind of bang it out in that sense. And I still write that way now. I don't really take notes. I remember it as I remember it. I remember and re-remember and re-remember. So it may not be the actual truth, but it's my truth, and I'm kind of comfortable with that. So my wife will often will often come out and I'm sitting on the back deck at 3:30 on a Tuesday, just looking out over the pond. And she's like, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "I'm writing, baby." Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I guess, my excuse for that. Yeah. That's my process.
You know, as I had the opportunity to read some of your work, and I am not a writer. Okay. I mean, I've written for a living doing technology work, process work, writing user guides. So, but writing prose, telling a story, that's new to me. I'm
Right.
used to interviewing people, kind of what you and I are doing today, or more like having a conversation, of which writing and other topics are coming up into the conversation. One of the things I took away from reading some of your works, there was a story of going down to Patagonia. You and your wife are down there, and you're the gringo from the north, etc. But your writing was there was a creative flair to it, okay? Versus a formula. Here's a pad of paper. I'm taking notes. I'm going to turn this into a story.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
that I thought was, and as I was reading some of the other pieces, that same style was there. There's a flair as opposed to somebody has taken notes and then he or she's going to go back to the typewriter, et cetera, and start to create something.
Yeah. Yeah. For a couple of reasons, I guess. I mean, it's not a travel log. I'm not saying this is how you do this thing. In some cases I do, but for the most part, and I think I refer to it as personal essays. This is my experience. It may not be your experience, but this is what I went through. And I guess I'm fortunate because I've done the short form writing for so long, the brand writing, whatever. I can get to the point pretty quickly or distill it down. So I'm talking about the point there isn't a lot of superfluous stuff. The first draft, certainly there is. I take all kinds of things out eventually, but yeah, I appreciate that. It is my style. Right, wrong, otherwise, I don't know. That is my style. It's the way I write. It's the way I'm comfortable writing. And I think I can, every once in a while, tell a reasonably good story.
Yeah, well, I think the testament that you're getting published
Right.
says, well, you must be doing something right, and that's great.
Yeah.
And they're entertaining. I mean, the one story again, I was reading one from the Patagonia. What were the names of the flies that I thought was really funny? The stupid black shit or white shit.
That was a different article. That was an article on why I don't tie flies, and it's entitled
Oh
Little Black
yeah,
Shit.
right.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that happened up in Northern California, where
Ah,
I was in a fly shop. It was the first time I fished up there. I was in a fly shop, And there's 1,000 flies and I don't know what's going to work. And the guy just called out from behind the counter, try some little black shit. And if that doesn't work, try some little brown shit. And it's like, okay. So it's like, and he's right. I mean, for the most part, you look at the nymphal stages of most flies, it just looks like something small and black or something small and brown. And that's it, and they all work. So now I have a fly box called LBS.
Okay, I love that, and and thank you for correcting me because I was melding two stories, but I do remember the Patagonian one for a couple other reasons.
Okay.
But what I loved, about you'd said something during one of our conversations. I think you and I were having dinner the night before we left, and about tying your own flies, and you said my hobby doesn't need a hobby.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I tend to be obsessive about this stuff, and I know that if I started to tie flies, and look, I have vices, I have everything I need. It's all been given to me by friends saying you have to tie flies. I don't want to do a deep dive because it'll eat up so much time and so much energy.
Right.
That's the first reason. The second reason, as I mentioned in our article, I really like fly shops.
Right.
And if I'm going to travel to a new place and I'm going to go into a fly shop anyway to pick their brains a little bit as where to fish, how to fish, whatever, the least I could do is spend $40 on flies and give them a little money. And obviously they know these flies are the best flies, all that stuff. So I kind of like hanging out and talking to those guys sometimes. So that's the other reason.
That makes total sense. And I feel that way when I head into a coffee shop because I love roasting my own coffee. I love talking to guys who have these massive roasters and women, and I get to chat them up a little bit. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
As far as fly fishing, you talked about rich guys from Connecticut, and there's definitely a rhythm that I have seen when it comes to fly fishing versus just throwing a fly and a bobber weight into the water and letting it follow the stream and maybe you caught something. But so it seems like there's an art to fly fishing. How did you begin to focus so much of your love for this kind of fishing versus other types of fishing that you might have done?
Well, as I mentioned, I fished when I was a kid, and that was just the traditional gear. And I didn't fish for 30 years, whatever it is. My wife and I were on a trip to Ireland some years ago, maybe about 15 years ago, I guess. And we were traveling in the West, we're traveling in Connemara, and we just happened to book a room in what turned out to be a very well-known fly fishing lodge. Didn't know that they happen to have a room. I found them online. In fact, so famous, people flew in from all over the world to fish, to salmon fish at this place. And we were sitting around the communal table at dinner after their day of fishing and our day of hiking. And I was just listening to these stories from all these people, the fishing here, where they've been. And I was getting a little more intrigued, I guess, by this. I said, oh, well, shit, maybe this is something I can do, right? The next morning, as we were leaving, I saw one of the old Gillies. Gilly is a guide in the UK, and he was preparing the rods and the waders for the day in the morning. And I went up to him, old Irish fellow, and I said, "Excuse me, if you don't mind me asking a question, why do you fly fish?" And he thought for a moment, old Irish guy, he's going to give me a good old Irish answer. He thought for a moment, and he said, "Well, there are two things in life that I know are coming, but I don't know when. And the first is a strike of a trout, and the second is death. And to tell you the truth, lad, I like the anticipation of both those things." And that was it. I bought my first fly rod 3 days later. And since then have been fishing. I've never forgotten that fellow. I've never forgotten that story. And it is this idea of anticipation, this idea of promise, this when you're fishing a river, what's around the next bend? How are the conditions going to change a little bit? What has just happened to give me a second chance at this fish or at this river or at this run or hole or whatever it is? I really love the way I become alive on a river. So
When you are on the river, if you could go deeper than I love the feeling of being alive, what else is going on in your mind and the just being in this environment?
well, I think what's kind of interesting about fly fishing, and certainly many people I think will agree with this, your mind goes blank a little bit. Blank in the sense that you're not thinking about your day, your job, the need to change the oil in your car, all that other stuff, because you are so focused on trying to trick that trout under those conditions. Where is that trout in a river? What is it eating? What stage of insect is it eating? Is it feeding subsurface or at the surface? Or what do I have to do to get my fly across this river in a multitude of currents to present perfectly to that trout? You're so focused on that everything else kind of drops away. So I guess in that sense, your mind kind of goes blank, or at least my mind goes blank a little bit.
Okay. Okay. In the trips that you have been on, as you can see, we have a couple of friends visiting you in the cabin in the woods.
Exactly.
It's okay. I've noticed since I lived in Las Vegas, there's very few bugs out here. I mean, if there's anything, they're all on the ground. And I have to be careful where I walk.
Yeah.
But when you are planning your trips, I mean, you spoke about Ireland and Patagonia, Northwest. You're going back to Iceland or Sweden coming up. Are you going, I know there's some business taking place, but you're going there to have this experience of fishing, fly fishing in these waters. Is that what's going to be happening for you when you can make these travels?
Yeah. I mean, I have a deal with my wife that I will go anywhere in the world as long as I get in a day of fishing. So there's that. So there's that travel that we do together where I try and find a way to fish for a little bit. There are a few trips where I'm going very specifically to fish, obviously, up to Nova Scotia for a week with a buddy. We just fished for 7 days. We ate, slept, drank, fished. That was it. Yeah. And I guess I'm going to satisfy a little wanderlust, to kind of see a different part of the world, to stand in a different river. I mean, it's a cliche, but it's true. Trout are found in the most beautiful spots in the world.
Yeah.
So whether you're down in Argentina, or whether you're up in Iceland or out in Montana, or I fished Wyoming the last day when we were there. These are just stunning environments. And the fact that I get to participate, the fact I get to witness them or experience them is just absolutely wonderful to me. Because again, I'm a kid from a small steel town in Canada,
I love it. I love it. I am curious that your wife, Elizabeth, that when you're on holiday vacation together, is she going on one of these fishing adventures with you? How's she doing?
She does very well. I would not say that she loves fishing as much as I do, but she definitely will fish. She will almost always catch a fish before I do, and almost always say, well, there's my day. See you later. I'm going to go and do something else for 8 hours. Yeah. That was very cool. I mean, honestly, the smartest thing I ever did was, as I mentioned, I bought that fly rod, and then we had just left New York City. We were going to spend a year in San Francisco. So I ended up down in San Francisco, became a member of the Golden Gate Casting and Angling Club in Golden Gate Park. And they took me on my first trout trip up to the Sierra. Beautiful little stream, North Fork of the Yuba River. And I got back that Sunday night, said to my wife, we're going to go up there the next weekend. So we did. I found a guide. He took us out, put my wife on this beautiful river. She caught a fish. She looked around the mountains and she said, I get it. And since then, she's never given me a hard time if I say, I want to go fishing somewhere, because she gets it. So that's, I got really smart on that one, or really lucky. I'm not sure, but it worked out well.
You're the best life. I love it.
Yeah.
As you are crafting these stories and there's fishing involved, where are some of the newer adventures? I mean, you mentioned you're going back to Sweden, but where are some of the new adventures where this love of fishing and writing are going to be coming together?
Yeah. Well, I just did my first tarpon trip down in Mexico over the winter, and that was pretty interesting. And I went down and specifically to fish with this one particular guide that I thought might be an interesting story. Along the northwest side of the Yucatan Peninsula is a very, very big tarpon fishery. And there's 2 towns at each end, Campeche and Isla Holbox, where there are big operations. These guys have it figured out. But there's all these tiny little fishing villages between where there's these independent guides just trying to make a go of it. And COVID was obviously very tough for them. They really sort of shut down. Nobody was coming down. And there was this one guy named Ishmael that someone I just barely knew said, yeah, I fished with this guy once and it was really cool. So I wanted to go down and fish with him. And I think ultimately write a story about him. So that was great. So that's the kind of thing that got me to go down and spend a week with him fishing and just having an absolutely wonderful time. Obviously there's big destinations. There's New Zealand I haven't been to. There's Russia. I haven't been to Alaska, that kind of stuff. Certainly I'd love to do that. I'm very, very fortunate here in the Catskill Mountains. I'm about an hour away from the birthplace of dry fly fishing in North America, which is Roscoe, New York. Famous water, the Beaverkill, Willowee, Delaware River system. But between me and Roscoe are a million little, what's referred to as little blue lines, little streams that hold heritage strain, the Catskills brook trout. You'll have to hike up to find them. You're going to spend all day. You're going to catch some little brook trout like this, but it is one of the more satisfying things I've done. I've caught big fish. I've caught plenty of fish. But if my last day of fishing is alone on a little Catskill stream, catching a little brook trout, I'm very happy with that.
I love that. I mean, that would, by the way, be the perfect way to end the podcast, but we're not going to end it just yet. But
Okay.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Now, I'm curious about a couple of items as I was reading and prepping for today's show. And I recall the story of the blue IKEA, I think it's called the Fracta bag.
The Fracta.
Tell us about that.
I just finished an article about the Fracta. I've been writing it in my head for a while. I have a lot of gear. Every angler, every outdoors person has a lot of gear, obviously. And, you try a bunch of things, what works, what doesn't work, et cetera, et cetera. And I was always a little frustrated with wading bags. And this is to put my very wet boots and gravelly boots and waders in to transport from one place to another. And one day I just sort of saw this big blue bag that my wife used for recycling in the back of the car. And I thought, oh, this might work. And I just dumped my stuff in there and went off to fish with a friend. And the bag is so big. I mean, everybody knows it's the IKEA big blue bag. I stood in it, put my boots and waders on. It's like, oh, this is nice and roomy and everything's dry. It was very easy to handle. There's 2 handles on it, a long or a short. You can throw it over your shoulder and it just holds a ton of stuff. The beauty, of course, is that it costs 99 cents. I have taken an IKEA Fracta bag all over the world. And it's a little silly because I will meet up with a bunch of anglers and they all have the hottest and greatest, Sims or Patagonia stuff or Orvis or whatever it is. And it's all great gear. And then I have my blue bag, right? That costs $1. But look, when all our shit is on the dock and we're trying to load something, I can find my bag pretty quickly. If I get lost in the woods, I think search and rescue will be able to see my blue bag.
I love it.
And I could always use it as a rain hat or raincoat, whatever. So yeah, I am a big advocate of that bag. Yeah. Fantastic. And there should be an article out in a few weeks or so about that.
All right.
I'll send you a link.
Definitely. And by the time this episode gets published, I think we'll be able to put the link in the show notes as well. I just love that story. And you literally, David, had me coming back home and, okay, where's my bags? I know I got the bags because we I go out to the desert and I keep my hiking boots in the car and they're in a bag because I don't want to bring them in and get them all the dusty and all that stuff here in the apartment. But you got to have bags like that we can just take our stuff and it works.
Well, I think that's it. It's utilitarian. It works. It's not precious. It's easily replaceable and it's seemingly indestructible. I've had this one, I've got a half dozen. They're all folded up neatly waiting to come into rotation. But the first one is still working, so
yeah,
why change
I love
it?
That. I love it. So I can see you handing out Fracta bags, wherever
I
you
should
go.
do that next conference. Yeah,
I think the next conference we need to go to IKEA. We need to share the story with them and say we want to hand out your Fracta bags at the conference. I think that could work. I think that could work.
Bad idea. All right.
Yeah. So I'd love to get a little reflective with you for just a moment. And as you look back in your career, I mean, and you've got a nice long part of the runway ahead of you, but you've got part of the runway behind you.
Mm.
as you look back, is there anything new that you would say or advice you would give to your earlier self about, life, what you've been doing? Anything you'd like to share?
Mm. Yeah, that's a bit of a tough one, Howard. I would, because I loved the outdoors so much when I was a kid, and there was a time when I was about to go into school where I was sort of torn, study film or study forestry. And there was a little part of me, not like I'm regretting anything I've done or decision I made, because it all contributed to getting me here. But there is a part of me that wonders what that that forestry life would have been like. Obviously, I would have none of this. I would have something different. I might be married to someone different, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I sometimes reflect on that. Other than that, I don't know. I try not to look back that much. I guess you were asking for advice to my younger self. Nothing other than a really obvious cliche sort of pops to mind. Sorry.
It's okay. That's okay.
Sorry,
It is
Howard.
what it is.
Yeah.
And if before we head out, what advice would you give to someone that read My Side of the Mountain, or perhaps there's some other goat book that they landed upon, and they said to themselves, wow, this is a great life. I get to fish in some of the most beautiful waters in the
Right.
world, or I get to travel, get to live in the woods in the Catskills. Any advice that you would give to somebody that would say, something, I want this in my life, the life that you have today? What advice would you give them?
Well, I would say try everything. And by try everything, what I mean is, early on when I was hiking or camping or backpacking a little bit or climbing, I guess, I had a certain type of conversation with the woods and with the outdoors. And then when I started fishing, I had a very different conversation. I wasn't expecting that. Then I started hunting and I had a very different conversation and I wasn't expecting that. And all of those being as multifaceted as possible allowed me to appreciate the core, which in my case, it's a northeastern forest, really allowed me to appreciate that. So I would say, yeah, just absolutely throw yourself into all those things. Be very fair and open about some things. The hunting thing is interesting because most city people don't do that. They don't have an opportunity to do that. But if you look at backcountry hunters and anglers, for example, or Trout Unlimited for us in New York City, we have an enormous turnout. These young people are just dying to have this different kind of conversation with the woods or with the outdoors. And I think that's what it is for me. On a really sort of small level, one of the things that I particularly enjoy, and again, this came out of hunting experience, was look, when we hike and you hike out in Nevada and so you know what this is like, I can hike through these woods and I'm going to see animals and there's some deer running away. There's a squirrel chattering, whatever. I am disturbing the wilderness essentially when I walk through and it kind of radiates out from me. So that squirrel chattering is just letting everybody else know within, 50 meters that I'm there, et cetera, et cetera. There is something about sitting at the base of a tree or sitting in a deer stand or whatever that is pre-dawn and letting the forest come to life around you. And if you're quiet enough and if you're still enough, they accept you, they don't notice you. And I've seen things just in that moment as the forest is becoming awake that I've never seen any other time. And it's small, insignificant stuff, the chipmunks, squirrels, certain birds, whatever that is, raccoons coming into to nest for the night, that kind of thing, deer. But it just, for me, was just utterly fascinating. And so I know lots of people are hiking and backpacking, whatever, and I would encourage them at some point, get up really early, walk away from your camp, sit down and just wait and let the animals, let nature come to you because it wants to come to you. Sometimes we've given up on nature, but it hasn't given up on us and it just wants to be invited in. And the best way to do that is to be as quiet as possible.
And I
So,
love that. And I totally empathize with that because I feel that way in the early mornings because I love my sunrise, my coffee, the
right.
quiet, and just listen to what's going on. So I totally appreciate and empathize with that statement. David,
Cool.
before we head out, if our listeners would like to learn more about you, perhaps to see some of your work or some of the photos you've taken,
Mhm.
where's the best place for them to go right now?
Yeah, I guess, Instagram, where I have a link tree link to articles that have been published. So yeah, that would be, sorry, this fly. Let nature come to you.
He's a feature of the show.
It's coming right in. Yeah, my Instagram account, which is the_real_DNM. David Nicholas McIlvaney. It's complicated. I need to come up with something a little more simpler. But yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, if you could provide a link, that'd be super cool. Yeah, that would be the best place. I've got articles coming up in a variety of things. I've got a really kind of fun one coming up on Nova Scotia in the Fly Fish Journal in the fall issue, which should be kind of cool. Anybody's ever fished for salmon, I think, would appreciate it. And,
Perfect. Yeah. Well, someday I hope I have an opportunity to fish with you. I will definitely, and I've actually shared this with a lot of people. So I'll be having a lot of firsts with a lot of individuals because I've never fished in my life. I don't know if I shared that with you. Yeah. No. Yeah, never.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I say. It's like, here I am in this wonderful organization, and they're either hunters. I've shot guns before, but I've never hunted. I mean, I hunt with my camera.
Right.
But that's what I shoot. But I would love to just be in the water, the quiet, and just kind of take in the nature. I think that would be a lot of fun to do. So hopefully you and I will have that experience together.
I look forward to that, Howard. I really look forward to seeing you again and sitting down and grabbing a beer as we did a few weeks ago. That was great.
Perfect. Well, listen, thank you again for taking the time. And we're going to provide the backlinks to the Instagram and to the link tree and really invite our listeners to check out your work. So thank you again for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, Howard. Man, great to see you again.
All right, folks, we have just been chatting with David McIlvaney, outdoor enthusiast, brand and long form outdoor adventure writer and producer. And what a phenomenal story. I love the fact that he grew up in a steel town in Ontario, not too far from the automotive town where I lived back, and grew up in the Detroit area, and really how, his career, took him all around the world as a producer, as a writer. And then because of COVID, really, perhaps, I don't know if you would call it, maybe you do, reinvention of and pursuing a whole other aspect of living his best life, which is really loving and appreciating the love of fishing, but also to taking these stories that he is writing in his head and sharing those and gifting those out to individuals like us who are just eating up this kind of adventure. And hopefully listening to David and about his adventures, that's going to be a spark for you to want to go out and have your adventures as well. So whether it's hiking, biking, hunting, but even fly fishing as well, or fishing in that wonderful stream, perhaps that's a couple miles from your home. We hope you take advantage of that. Now, we are going to provide the backlinks to David's Linktree site so you can read some of his articles, and we'll provide the link back to his Instagram site. As for us, you can find us on outdooradventureseries.com. We're also on LinkedIn and Facebook on our Outdoor Adventure Series pages, and we are on all of the major podcasting platforms. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day, and we will see you on a future episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Take care now.